This is Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Today is our second installment of Animal Hour, our weekly March series about the creatures that live in our region. Each week, we're focusing on a different animal or type of animal, and today it's wild cats. Now, I've never been lucky enough to see a bobcat or a lynx, the two types of large cats that live in our region. The closest thing I have is my pet cat. And most mornings, I try to snag a couple quiet minutes reading with a hot cup of coffee and my cat on my lap. And this ritual always starts out so cozy. But the second I shift in my seat or I deign to sniff or sneeze or something, my cat extends her nails right into my thigh. And it's a daily reminder that even though this creature eats dry food from an automatic feeder and spends most of her day sleeping on a couch, she still has within her the DNA of larger and wilder ancestors. And those are the creatures we'll be talking about today: bobcats, lynx, and the elusive catamount. Our guest is Declan McCabe, a biology professor at St. Michael's College in Colchester. He documents the prevalence of bobcats on campus and in the broader area. Declan, welcome.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We are so glad to have you. And listeners, we would love for you to join the conversation as well. Tell us about your latest big cat sighting, and perhaps we can help you identify what exactly it was. So I don't want to jump too far ahead, Declan, but I will say we've gotten a lot of people writing and telling us that they've seen catamounts. What is your initial reaction to that?
Well, I hate to be too skeptical, but it would be unlikely, not impossible, but unlikely. Having said that, I've got one very reliable person that I know who's a wildlife photographer, and he has seen what he believes to be a mountain lion in South Burlington, based on the length of its tail and the jump. He's a very reliable witness. I can't argue with him.
Okay. All right. Well, if you got photos, you got pictures, a good description, you can email us at vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. But Declan, let's start with the bobcat. First, what does a bobcat look like?
So a bobcat looks about twice or three times the size of a domestic cat. It's got spotted fur frequently, not always. It's got a very short tail, and the underside of that tail is white. So that is an important distinguishing characteristic. And frequently when someone tells me they've seen a catamount, I will ask them about the tail, and they'll say they either didn't notice the tail or it was a short tail, and you know immediately that they've seen a bobcat. And it's a common mistake, and I totally understand it. So, yeah, but we do get them on campus quite a bit, and that's why we set up our trail camera network to have a look at them.
And it is a surprisingly stubby looking tail. I think when you're used to seeing a house cat that has a long winding tail with a lot of personality, and then you see a bobcat's tail, you're like, oh, it feels very different. Yeah,
I mean, we have one that we've gotten on camera several times that has quite a long tail, and it's by long for a bobcat, it's about 7 inches, I would guess. It's hard to tell length accurately from a trail camera photograph, but we call him the long-tailed bobcat, but even that is 6-7 inches, you know?
Yeah. Well, another way to know if you've seen or been near a bobcat is by its sound that it makes. It's very distinctive. We have a clip of a bobcat's bark, as it's called. Here, let's take a listen. It's no bird song.
No. It's pretty ungodly. No one would call it a roar, and you wouldn't call it a purr either. Although they can purr. They really can't roar, but they can purr. But it's a pretty amazing vocalization, and that's how they communicate.
What makes you say amazing about that sound?
I think it's like nothing else you're going to hear. You know, you hear people talking about hearing various things in the woods and asking, you know, the classic question I get frequently is, I've heard something that sounds like a woman being murdered in the woods. Is that a bobcat? And it's not. It's usually a red fox.
Okay, it's not usually a birder, though, right?
It's not usually a birder. The birders know their sounds backwards and forwards. This is usually from somebody who heard something in their backyard.
Yeah.
And it's usually a red fox, so they make an ungodly sound. And a lot of people think that they're hearing a fisher cat, but it's not the fisher cat either. It really is the red fox that's making that ungodly sound.
Okay, well, I'm glad you brought up the fisher cat in our conversation today about wild cats. Is a fisher cat a cat?
Not at all, no.
Not at all.
It's a mustelid.
So, what? What?
Mustelidae is the family, mustelids. So weasels, otters, fisher cats, and mink. They're all in the same group. And when I first moved to Vermont, I had the same question. People were like, "Oh, you better keep your poodles inside. The fisher cat's going to get them." And I started looking up fisher cats to figure out what the heck that was. But no, not a cat at all. But beautiful animals, and they're misunderstood. They don't typically get very many cats or pets. People have done the diet analysis, and pets would be very, very far down on the menu. If you're worried about your cat outside, the biggest risk is going to be roadkill from a car, and second to that might be coyotes. But bobcats are down the list quite a ways, and fisher cats also. So, but there are many other reasons to keep your cat inside for both their health and for the health of the wildlife. So outside cats have a far shorter and less healthy life than a well cared for indoor cat.
Like my very tubby cat.
Yeah, probably
that's right.
Yeah.
You mentioned that bobcats will very rarely try to attack or eat a domesticated animal.
Right.
What do they like to eat?
So we've gotten them on trail cameras with grey squirrels in their mouth. They'll certainly go for snowshoe hare just like a lynx would. And down in the valley, in the Champlain Valley, they're getting a lot of cottontail rabbits. They'll occasionally go for carrion, for dead things. Once in a rare while, they'll get a deer.
A deer? That's impressive.
So yeah, they can take a fawn, and they can take a deer that's bogged down in the snow or otherwise disabled in some shape or form. And we've got wonderful footage of a deer out on the ice on the Winooski River. It was coming across from South Burlington towards Colchester. And a UVM student was down in our natural area and took wonderful photographs. Jacob Crawford took these beautiful photographs of coyotes and of bobcats consuming this deer on the ice.
Wow.
Yeah, there wasn't a lot left when they were finished.
Oof. Well, good for them, I guess.
Just some bones.
And do they hunt in a solitary way or as a pack, like female lions do?
I have footage of them trying to hunt a skunk as a pair. So there was 2 bobcats circling this skunk on our camera. And skunks are a pretty intimidating prey item.
Yeah.
And we have no evidence to suggest that they actually were successful, but it's possible. But in that case, they were hunting as a pair. So most likely a mom and a cub hunting together. But typically they're going to be hunting on their own. So when you see family groups, it's when you see more than one bobcat on a camera, I would expect it to be a family group, and they will hunt together at that point.
We've talked about what bobcats eat. What eats bobcats?
Well, bobcats around here at this point don't have much in the way of predators that can go for them. So, occasionally a great horned owl might take a cub, for example, a small bobcat. But I don't think there's very many effective predators. Occasionally a fox might take a young one. And if that happens, if a bobcat loses its litter early in the season, they can breed again and they can have a litter later in the season. So I think the major predation of bobcats is going to be on the smallest ones.
We got an email from a listener named Daniel in Waterbury who wants to know what you think, Declan, about a study from Vermont Fish and Wildlife about bobcats testing positive for rodenticide. Dan writes, Vermont needs to protect bobcats better, and that stops with stopping bobcat hunting and trapping. Have you heard about bobcats testing positive for rodenticide?
Absolutely, yeah. It's common practice in some larger buildings to hire a pest control company to come in to control rodents. And frequently they will put rodenticide in little plastic enclosures that sit along the outside basement of the building on the soil, and rodents will wander in, eat the rodenticide and wander out again. And at that point they can be incapacitated and eventually die. But they can be consumed by bobcats, by fisher cats, by birds of prey. So it's a significant risk for these animals to consume these rodenticides. Some of the rodenticides prevent clotting, for example. So if a high enough dose gets into a predator, it causes them to bleed out, essentially, from some minor injury that would otherwise have healed. So it can be a slow, miserable death for a predator. And we're trying to protect our predators. And the predators are doing a wonderful job and a wonderful service for us by keeping the rat population down. But if we decide to use rodenticide, then we're messing with that system.
So when we talk about bobcats' biggest predators, it's us.
Well, yeah. Roadkill is a high risk, and then the rodenticide is also a very high risk. Yeah. So it's something that we need to be much more careful about. And be much more sparing in the use of rodenticides if you actually need them.
So, Declan, through your work at St. Michael's College in Colchester, you have set up a series of cameras in the region to track bobcats. Can you tell us more about this project?
Absolutely, yeah. Students are always looking for research opportunities, and I'm an entomologist, and so they would come to my lab and say, hey, I want to do some research. And I'd say, oh, let's work on some insects. Insects are really cool. And the students would say, well, we want to work on really cool animals. And, because we're a small college, we have the flexibility to branch out into other areas. So when the price of trail cameras came down, 5-10 years ago, I just started getting trail cameras and documenting right on our campus, first of all, and looking at different conditions, like comparing open areas to areas with tighter woodlands, comparing areas with fallen logs to areas without falling logs. And it's very easy to come up with a series of answerable questions that you can simply research by strapping cameras onto a tree. So for someone like me to get involved in live trapping or radio collaring and all of that stuff involves so much permitting and other things that would slow me down, that the trail camera system is just a really beautiful way to get out there and get data in a hurry. And the students really love looking at those images, tabulating the data, testing hypotheses, making graphs, presenting the results at a professional meeting. It's just a beautiful and inexpensive system that generates data rapidly, and the students love it.
That's great, but it also breaks my heart a little to hear that you're an entomologist and you're being forced into the world of big cats. Is there any way that you see these two very different species and worlds overlapping?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So we've had a dramatic drop in the number of insects on the planet worldwide, and that triggers all the way up through the food web. So, the bobcats are integral in that system. You need the insects to feed the rodents. You need the rodents to feed the bobcats. So it's all a connected system. And, most of my training is actually ecological. So applying what I've learned with the ecology of insects to the ecology of mammals is just a short step. It's the same statistical techniques, randomize, replicate, calculate your averages, do your statistical analysis, make your graphs. It's the same whether you're working on bobcats or whether you're working on caddisflies. So I don't really feel too put upon by being compelled to work on these beautiful animals.
And it's great to see the interests of students expanding your interest as well.
And, every so often students will come along and say, I want to work on insects in Lake Champlain. And I'm like, okay, got you covered.
Let's do it. So say you want to spot a bobcat. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing this, just staring out the window for years and years, hoping and praying. How can you increase your chances?
Oh, God, that's so challenging. So there's a reason why there are so many bird watchers and bird watching organizations and so few mammal watchers and mammal organizations. So first of all, you got the nocturnal issue. So a lot of mammals are out at nighttime and very, very secretive. Bobcats, I've gotten many, many daytime photographs, so I know they're active in daytime, but they're still very secretive. And the closest we've gotten to a student seeing a bobcat was about 3 minutes. We know this because the student picked up the trail camera and looked at the SD card, and the timestamp difference was 3 minutes between when the camera was picked up by the student and the bobcat had been photographed. So the bobcat was keenly aware that the student was coming. So this isn't a good answer to your question. I would love to see more bobcats, but I don't typically see them. I get them on my trail cameras. I was very jealous when my wife and my daughter both saw one day. And I've gone to that location many times, and I haven't seen any.
Well, we got an email from Katrina in Weybridge, who also had a near miss, it sounds like. They write, I found some awfully big paw tracks on fresh snow on Sunday in Barnett. They led to a brook where several deer had also visited. The tracks told the story of the deer clearly being spooked. However, no blood on sight.
Yeah. So clearly they went to a place where there was, the footprints were there. She hasn't really said for sure if they were bobcat prints, but I'll tell you a story from class recently. Brian Swisher is our behavioral ecologist, and he took students out. And what they do is they go out after a recent snow, they look for fresh tracks, and they put their trail cameras where they've seen the tracks. And so they did find bobcat tracks on campus. They put the camera in the right place, and within 3 days they had the bobcat on camera. And they actually got two bobcats in the same picture, which suggests a mom and offspring. And they got another bobcat. It looked like a different individual at the same location. So you can definitely go out, find the footprints, and if you've got a trail camera, put the trail camera out and get some images. I would hesitate to say go hang out where the footprints were, because I don't think the bobcat is going to come back anytime soon. So it's frequently luck. I saw a gray fox the other day running across between the dance studio and the prison in South Burlington. Just was running by, but I couldn't possibly have predicted he was coming.
Which one do you think he was heading to?
He looked like he was heading towards the dance studio.
Yeah. We're speaking with Declan McCabe of St. Michael's College about bobcats. We're going to broaden out our conversation in just a moment to other wildcats that live in our region. We'll also be joined by a wildlife tracker with tales of stalking cats across the country. You can call in and tell us about your own sightings. We're going to take those calls in just a minute. Our number is 800-639-2211. This is Vermont Edition. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lefrak. If you're just joining us, we are talking about bobcats, lynx, and other wild cats that live in our region. It's the second installment of Animal Hour, a weekly series we're doing throughout March. Our guest is St. Michael's College biology professor Declan McCabe. And let's add one more voice to the conversation here. Sue Morse is a wildlife tracker and naturalist from Jericho. She's been tracking more than 50 years, and she's spent a lot of time out west studying the habits of pumas. She's also the founder and science director for Keeping Track, a wildlife conservation nonprofit. Sue, welcome.
Well, thank you.
Sue, back in 2015, you came on this program to say that cougars are moving back east. They haven't been officially here in over 100 years. What's the status update?
Well, the status, as best we know it, is that we have evidence of occasional transient pumas, toms especially, making journeys from source habitats in places like the Dakotas, for example, and possibly parts of Canada, and moving eastward, okay? And it's a curious phenomenon, for example, that they'll often use the Mississippi River corridor to head east, but then north and get up into Canada that way. We know that there have been a few individuals. There was a curious female, what I call colonizer puma. It's more typical that the males would make these journeys as transient animals looking for a home range, and the females stay closer to their mother's home range. But lo and behold, a female went all the way from South Dakota to Humphreys County, Tennessee, where she was unfortunately shot by a hunter. And there was another female that went all the way from Utah to Colorado, crossing several rivers and several major highways, and really crossing the gauntlet, as it were, and she too was killed. So what is happening is that there are occasional animals moving and trying to find a new home. My feeling is that we're not going to see a population start to build until a male gets into an eastern habitat in which he finds sign of resident females. Then he'll stay put, and he'll take up residence, and he'll become, the male of the neighborhood, so to speak. And so we don't know that has happened yet, but it could. And I just want to say this in all appropriate humility. I've been doing research here at Wolf Run in northwestern Vermont for almost 50 years. It'll be 50 years this summer. And I remember when there were no Fisher tracks. I remember when there were no moose tracks. And so that was on Tuesday or possibly Wednesday. And lo and behold, on Thursday or possibly Friday, there they were. So my point is this. I'm not going to slam the door shut on these animals. It's always... in science, it's always a good idea to keep an open mind, and as Declan has emphasized, collect your data in a rigorous manner, and so on. So it's going to happen, but not because we say it's not going to happen. Yeah.
Can we also define our terms here real quick? We are throwing around the word puma and catamount and mountain lion. Sue, what's the difference, if any?
Well, okay, everybody in the audience, let's have a little fun and join me and repeat what I say. Puma, mountain lion, cougar, catamount, panther, painter. In Utah, they call them deer slaying son bitch. They're all names for the same animal. Okay? They're all Puma concolor.
So you're pushing the boundaries of our FCC regulations here.
Oh, I think. Okay. Anyway, forgive me. So anyway, the point I want to make is that in different geographic regions, there are some differences in their behaviors, and in the case of the Florida panther, it would seem that there's certainly some slight differences in their appearance, but they're the same animal. And they once occupied the broadest, widest, biggest geographic distribution of any animal on the North American continent, from the Yukon all the way, Patagonia, all the way to Alaska, or Yukon anyway.
And the last confirmed catamount that was killed in Vermont was in 1881. And in 2018, I believe, the eastern cougar, that name, was officially declared as extinct across its entire native range, which included Vermont.
Well, and again, in all appropriate humility and respect, I will say that I was not a fan of that decision because I'm not convinced there was such a thing as an eastern cougar per se.
Oh.
There are cougars all the way across North America. Where do they become eastern? Where do they become midwestern? Where do they come western? They're different animals in their different home range areas, but they're the same species.
Yeah. And we have gotten a lot of emails and some calls, which we're going to take in just a second, from folks who are sure that they have seen one, including Diane, who says, I'm happy to say I've seen a live and fully powerful catamount crossing 89 at French Hill, and more recently a bobcat in my yard in Burlington. They live so much closer to us than we know or see. Declan, one type of big cat we haven't really mentioned yet is the lynx.
Yeah.
That is a totally separate species, right? How do you know you're seeing a lynx versus one of these other guys?
Lynx is in the same genus with the bobcats. They overlap significantly in size, and we do get them. We had one that was rambling around all the way down in Addison County and down in Rutland this year. Very well documented, very thoroughly documented. We had another one that was on video, got by a wildlife biologist in his backyard in Jericho. So they do show up. They cross the border on a regular basis. But they're quite different in many ways from the bobcat. They're sort of higher in the back end. Their tails are distinctly different. They've got taller ear tufts, and they're a much more likely thing to see than certainly than a mountain lion. But every hunter I know tells me they've seen one.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is, two things about the hunters. They're good observers. They're out in the woods more than I am. But they also have trail cameras, and I'd love to see a photograph, and I've yet to see a photograph from a trail camera of a mountain lion.
Right.
But lynx is a real possibility and a regular occurrence.
If you have what Declan is looking for, email vermontedition@vermontpublic.org. Let's go to the phones. We have William in Morrisville on the line. William, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you. Good. I'm glad you mentioned the hunters and the trail cameras. I was going to say that. That is the biggest mammal observation club in the state, so that's a good network for you. I would tell you that last week I'm at Smugs. I'm actually at Smuggler's Notch parking lot right now. I just pulled in to ski. Last week, after light snow and a mild evening, I observed on the way up the Sterling Lift, nearly more than halfway up, both fox and what I assume were bobcat tracks, because they were definitely a cat with a big puffy paw. And they were crossing each other under the lift, probably foraging for dropped crackers and granola bars, as it were. And it looked like I had quite a fun time while we were sleeping. So I thought that was an interesting observation that high up this time of year.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, we hope you spot something else there, William, and thanks for calling in. Enjoy the slopes. Sue, can you give us some tips on taking a look at paw prints and figuring out what kind of animal you might be seeing?
Well, I mean, the other animals' tracks that some people mistake for puma tracks. Let me limit it to that. They're very different. If you look at a dog track, be it a wolf or a coyote or a dog, the toe arrangement is symmetrically arranged with the two forward toes on an even line with one another and the two rear toes on an even line with one another. And then the palm pad comes to a point, like the pointed muzzle of a dog, pugs notwithstanding. Cats are entirely different. Their foot arrangement is asymmetrical, so those four toes are not going to line up with each other at all. And if you look at your left hand and fold your thumb under, everybody, look at your four fingers. Your middle finger sticks out ahead of all the others, and cats have that. And so that's how you know it's your left hand, because lo and behold, it's where our middle finger is, and lo and behold, on the outside of that hand, the little finger is the lowest of all four fingers. Do you see what I'm saying? So It's very asymmetrical. The palm pad comes to a bilobed, broader top than the dog. And so with the dog, you can draw an X through the track without intersecting any of the pad features. With the cat, not so. The cat's asymmetrical foot arrangement prohibits that.
Oh, great tips. All right, let's keep going with these calls. We have Robert in Harland. Robert, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, I moved to where I am now in Heartland 30 years ago, and it was a fixer-upper. I was tearing stuff out, and I went out onto the back porch to get fresh air, and I thought I was looking at a bobcat, and it was laying down. I think it got a mouse or something, and I was watching it for quite a while, and then it got up and started walking away and realized it had a long tail, but it had the colors of a bobcat. And years later, I was helping my wife with a trade show, and they had these books, and I was going through these books, and I found that cat, and it was a juvenile mountain lion. And then years after that, I saw another one very close to where that one was, and it had a long tail, but it had the colors of a mountain lion. I watched it as it walked into the brush. But I got a good look at it. I got a really good look at the first one. I watched it for a long time.
Sue, what do you think?
My story.
Sue, what do you think? Do you think you saw a mountain lion?
No, I'm not in a position to say yes or no. I'm in a position to say congratulations and all that. And I'm not being cynical at all. That's just not my nature. And as a scientist, I have an open mind about what's going on out there. And there's just a lot we don't know. And that's all I'm going to say. Yeah. But it's going to happen. And that's not all I'm going to say. I'll add one more thing.
Sure.
There's no place like home. Northern New England, with its vast assemblage of wildlands and connective habitats, is perfectly suited for resident mountain lions. We have everything here that they used to eat, from beaver and snowshoe hare to deer and moose. It's all here. It's just a matter, and porcupine, I might add. They're famous for eating porcupines. They kill them the same way the fisher does, or at least they eat them the same way. If you find a cougar-killed porcupine, it will be its back to the ground, and it will be fed upon from the stomach in. It looks like it was skinned. It's really quite remarkable.
Oof. Declan, you ever caught one of those on camera?
No. We're because we're in an urban area, there is a possibility of porcupine, but we haven't gotten porcupine in our natural area. It's big enough to sustain them, but there's no evidence. There's no characteristic footprints. Yeah.
Well, porcupines, if you're listening, watch your backs. Let's go back to the phones. We have Janet calling in from Lake Placid. Janet, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi. I'm in the Adirondacks at the near the Ausable River.
Oh, great.
Mouth of the Ausable River. So I'm right across the lake. And I believe 10 years ago, I saw a mountain lion cross the Northway, someplace near Plattsburgh. So there was traffic. And it did a beautiful job of it, absolutely amazing. It was larger than the German Shepherd. It had a very long tail. It was, the way it moved was very cat-like and amazingly beautiful, and got across the road okay. That was just, I was mesmerized and delighted. But I was also wondering about the lake being either a passageway or something that would prevent these animals from living on both sides? Or can we assume that there's the same kind of animals living in the woods, both in the Adirondacks and the Green Mountains, etc.?
Oh, yeah.
Sue, go ahead.
Yeah, well, for sure. And one of the big, I think, exciting and crucially important challenges we have before us now with the impacts of climate change, compromising habitat quality in some ways, and of course development. We really need to identify what we call core habitats, the larger, wild, unbroken habitats, and connective habitats that link them all together, because that's how these animals move around. And when we think about connectivity between Vermont, for example, and the Adirondacks, yeah, there's ways around the lake, and ways around the lake when it's smaller in places where we know that there's this kind of movement that can occur, and we should be really conserving these areas while we can.
And one thing I've been struck by getting these emails and hearing calls from folks spotting these wildcats, whatever they might be, is how powerful the experience is, how it really sticks with people, including a listener named Alice, who wrote to us about a sighting she had in July of 1971.
Oh, wow.
She writes that she was walking down a logging road near Burke Mountain to pick raspberries and noticed a largish, tawny-colored, quote-unquote, cat sitting on a stone wall. I wondered what a cat was doing way out here, Alice writes. As I got closer, this cat stood up and then leapt off the stone wall. It was like watching the video of a panther or a leopard. It was much bigger than a cat, and it had a long tail that whipped the air behind it. Wow, what else could it be? I wondered if it was an adolescent looking for a territory or just moving through. I'll never forget it. What a gift.
Yeah, well, that's the way it's going to be. I mean, I've seen them out west. I've radio collared them. I've tracked them. They are my favorite animal, along with caribou, interestingly enough. And they really stop your heart.
Huh.
They're incredibly powerful. I mean, they could broad jump 40 feet.
Wow. All right, mountain lions and caribou for you, insects and bobcats for Declan. I like this. Let's go to Peg in South Burlington. Peg, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. And I live on the south side of Burlington, right on the edge of Red Rock Park.
Mm-hmm.
And the other night, after the snow had sort of melted away, my deck, I live in a condo, so it's about 15 feet high up above the ground. I got a business card from a business visitor, I guess, from the business end of the visitor. And in the morning, of course, I saw it, and my cat also, who spends time on that deck frequently, saw it. And so I've taken photos and asked around, and it seems to have been a bobcat.
Oh, yeah.
I'm wondering, they do shinny up posts of decks?
Sorry, Peg, could you say your question again? I couldn't quite hear it.
She wanted to know if she was shinning up a post to get onto her deck.
Oh, Declan, let's throw this one to you, our bobcat expert.
Absolutely. They're very capable climbers, and a deck post is nothing to them. And there's lots and lots of evidence that they are in South Burlington and Burlington.
Oh, yeah.
Lots of iNaturalist observations. And in fact, the iNaturalist observations are a wonderful tool. But they do seem to reflect a number of people who are looking rather than the actual number of bobcats that are out there. So we've lots of Burlington observations, lots of Colchester observations, and very few Richmond observations. But we know there's tons of bobcats in Richmond. So it's more about who's looking. So I would encourage people to get an iNaturalist account and document the footprints and put the photos up there, and you'll get lots of good opinions.
Peg, I really appreciate your description of a business card left from the business end of the bobcat. I assume you mean scat.
We got a wonderful observation on our trail camera the first summer we started doing it. The bobcat backed right up to the camera. All of the images were crystal clear, and then the bobcat marked its territory on the camera.
Oh,
and all of the images thereafter were fuzzy and out of focus.
Let's take one more call. We have Francis in Sheffield. Francis, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Yeah, my curiosity. I was walking down my dirt road, and I thought it was in the fall of last year, and I thought it was a bear coming out of the woods. So I just stopped. I was like 50 feet away, and it was a cat. I mean, a big cat, but it was black on the head and slowly like turned like a chocolate brown. And it had like a 2-foot tail on it. Just walked right across the street in front of me. Was following a deer track. And I was just wondering, I mean, is that unusual to have one that dark? I've never seen one before in my life, so.
Sue?
Yeah, that is unusual. Different lighting, of course, can make their medley of colors look darker or lighter. But generally speaking, the official feeling is we do not have any black pumas anywhere, even South America. We have melanistic jaguars, which are black, and of course leopards, which can come in black. But so far as anybody knows, pumas are always going to be brown. But here's a tip, and if you're like Declan and you've got your remote cameras out there, if you think you've got a picture of a puma, look at the face, because it has something that bobcats and ocelots and lynxes and all the other cats don't have. Its muzzle is white, so right around the lips and beneath the nose, it's solid white. And then that whiteness, where the whiskers are coming out to the sides, that whiteness is framed in black. So if you look at Northern Woodlands Magazine, any of my many articles on wildlife, there are pictures in there that I've taken of pumas. And you can look at any good textbook on wildlife, and you'll see what I'm describing. A white muzzle, a pink nose, and then the whiteness is framed in black.
Wow.
And that's unique to puma. No other cat has that.
Declan, what should somebody do if they see one of these big cats?
Oh, be thankful that you've seen one more than anything. Wildlife biologists are aware that they're out there. If you really believe that you've got a mountain lion observation, that's fascinating. If you've got a photograph, everybody would like to see it, right? And
do you report it?
I don't. It's not necessary to report a bobcat because we know they're there. Every general location where we've put cameras, we've done South Burlington, we've done Intervale in Burlington, we've done places in South Burlington where the town was interested. We've done highway underpasses. We've done our own campus, and everywhere that we put cameras, we have recorded bobcats. So I don't know that it's necessary to report it to anybody, really, other than be happy you've seen it.
Just like Lisa in Barnett, who says a little over 20 years ago, they saw a large catamount cross in front of them on Mack Mountain Road in Peacham. The animal was quite close and walking slowly. It was unmistakable. This is a very wild area, so it makes perfect sense to Lisa that this cat would live up there. Quite a thrill, they write. Well, it's been a thrill hearing about these animals today. Our guests were St. Michael's College biology professor Declan McCabe in Colchester. Declan, thanks so much for telling us about your research.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. We were also joined by the wildlife tracker and naturalist Sue Morse. Sue, you're an expert. It's fascinating to hear everything that you know. Thanks for joining us.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you.
And coming up, we are going to hear a pretty wild tale about an ancient bobcat burial and what it teaches us about our own pet cats. That's in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to Vermont Edition. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Today on the show, we are learning about the wild cats that live in our region. Lynx, bobcats, and maybe even catamounts. It's the second installment of Animal Hour, our weekly March series about the creatures that live around us. Now, you might be wondering, as I am, when these wild cats made the shift towards living indoors, sitting on laps, and judging us. Researchers in Illinois found what could be an important clue. A 2,000-year-old burial mound containing the remains of a young bobcat bore signs of domestication. Here to tell us about that discovery is Terrence Martin. He's the curator emeritus of anthropology at the Illinois State Museum. Terrence, thanks for calling in.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is an interesting program.
Yeah. So tell us about this burial mound and how it was first discovered. It was back in 2015, right?
Well, there's a series of work, a lot of work, archaeological work to make way for different highway projects. This was the Central Illinois Expressway, which is now Interstate 72, connects Springfield, Illinois to Quincy, Illinois, on the west side of the state. And this was a series of archaeological salvage work to make way for the expressway.
So you were looking around in the earth, making way for an expressway, and what was found?
Yeah, work was done between 1979 and 1985, and it was a Center for American Archaeology and archaeological program from Northwestern University that were involved at that time. And so I wasn't a part of that project, but at the Illinois State Museum, we have a lab where we identify animal remains from archaeological sites. And so we also curate material from around the state. And so this is the excavation of one of the mound groups is called the Elizabeth Mound Group on the west bluff overlooking the Illinois River in Pike County. And this was a mound group of maybe 14 mounds. Mound 7 was one particular mound that was the largest. And within this mound, amongst isolated human burials, was one isolated burial of an animal. And this was reported as a puppy back when the initial analysis was done.
Okay.
And that was curated at the State Museum. I had an intern working with me at the time who was working on domesticated dogs, origin of domesticated dogs in North America, and especially the Midwest and Eastern North America. So part of her work was looking at collections and inspecting some of the actual curated remains of some of these burials, some of these findings. And this one from Elizabeth Mound, she was looking at, and she said, called out to me and said, "This isn't a puppy." I came out of my office and said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "Look at these teeth." And it was definitely a cat. And so we saw we had a juvenile cat that had been misidentified as a puppy in this middle woodland mound. And this mound group dates between, like you said, it's between AD 25 and AD 80. Sometime it was placed in this mound group.
And we
by
know
itself.
that it wasn't, just a bobcat that happened to die near where these humans were buried. It was very purposefully placed there, and it had something like particular markings or carvings with it. Is that right?
It was placed on its left side. It was buried just like another human would be buried, but on its left side, and along with it was a necklace that was placed with it. And it consisted of 4 shell beads and 2 bear canine, we call them effigy bear canines. They were carved bone pieces carved in the shape of bear canine teeth that were included on this necklace that was with this bobcat.
What do we know about the people who were involved in this burial and their relationship with animals?
Well, that's something that's been a long-term study that we look at because we have different time periods, and some of these practices change over time from the Archaic period, early, middle, late Archaic. We get into the woodland period. This particular burial association is Middle Woodland, what's referred to as Hopewell in the Midwest, and mound building groups. Just a little bit, this is right on the onset of agriculture in the lower Illinois Valley and then the Midwest. And these groups are hunting gathering groups, but they also did some agriculture with some of the eastern plants, wild plants, and fishing, hunting. But they did bury certain animals. Like domesticated dogs, we do find them buried in some of the village sites, but we've not found any of these in mound sites as yet.
So this discovery took place about a decade ago from remains that were brought up a few decades before that. What was the response from other researchers, maybe folks in other parts of the country outside of Illinois? Has this been used as the basis for other anthropological work?
Well, I think it's making people aware of a couple different things that this unique relationship of felids with early human cultures in North America. Uh, we have not found any instance in North America of a cat, either a bobcat or a mountain lion, uh, given this kind of burial, given this kind of treatment.
Oh, it's the only one.
This is the only one that we know so far. And there again, one of the things that what's important about this is that make sure accurate identifications are made of any of these animal remains. This was a fully articulated skeleton. And so we were really fortunate because we could come up with a really good age estimate of the individual and not only the species, but the age situation as well. But it's important to have these identifications accurate. It's like some of the previous callers that called in with sightings. Is it a mountain lion? Is it a bobcat? Is it a lynx? And with trail cameras and things, we want to make sure that the what's being claimed is that being accurate. And this is the same with archaeological work. We want to make sure that if something is published, that the identification is verified so that you're not going off on tangents somehow.
And lastly, can you tell us a little bit more about how that identification was made? You said it was an intern who discovered it?
It was an intern who discovered it, but she had lots of experience with the animal remains and identifying animal remains. In fact, that's what she was an intern there to perfect some of her skills on this. And we at the Illinois State Museum we have a natural history collection and collections devoted specifically for identification of animal remains from archaeological sites, something like 11,000 whole or partial animal skeletons. And so we compare the archaeological remains directly to skeletons, reference skeletons with known information in our collections. And so when we found out this was a bobcat, it was a juvenile bobcat, we went through the collections and we were able to match a modern specimen that I think that was from 1979 when the modern specimen was collected. And it matched exactly with the tooth eruptions and the long bone epiphyses, whether they were unfused. It lined up directly with an age between 4 and 7 months for the individual bobcat in the burial.
Wow. Well, what a fascinating discovery. Terrence Martin is the Curator Emeritus of Anthropology at the Illinois State Museum. Terrence, thanks for taking us on this little trip outside of our region here in Vermont Edition today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, and good to get the word out on the importance of felids.
Yeah. Well, that is all the time we have for today's show. You can find our previous Animal Hour show on the Vermont Edition podcast feed. We kicked things off last week with an hour on beavers. Next up is bats. Today's show was directed by Aaliyah Papes. Our managing producer is John Ahrens, and our producers are Andrea Lorian and Daniela Fierro. Anna Berg is our intern. Our call screener today was Rick Barrett, and our theme music was composed by Myra Flynn. I'm Michaela Lafrac. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch up again soon.